Australia has talked tough about arresting Netanyahu for war crimes. So has Canada. Australia has not vetted its migrants for cultural fit and nonviolence. Same in Canada. I hate to say it, and I pray it doesn't come, but I am completely certain that we will have a violent terrorist.
I want to ask you about Canada's hate speech laws and attacks on freedom of speech. What is the Liberal government doing at the moment in Canada to try and combat what they call hatred?
Well, they're doing a lot of things. It seems like they have more bills or proposed laws on censorship than on any other subject, more than on inflation, more than on the Ukraine-Russia situation. It is the most important thing if you measure it by the sheer number of attempts to bring in censorship. Now, a number of these sort of evaporated last year when Justin Trudeau resigned and the Parliament was prorogued. So any bills that weren't passed suddenly disappeared. But they're trying again. In fact, they've just proposed something called Bill C-9, which they laughably call the Combating Hate Act. But hate's a human emotion. You can no more legislate it away than you can command people to love. You can't do that. Hate comes from a sense of an underlying grievance. And as any married man knows, simply telling your wife, well, calm down, or you're carried, it doesn't stop their feeling of grievance. And if there's someone out there who is really upset about something in the world, telling them to shut up will only make it worse. That's what C9 does. It's an attempt to tell people to have the right feelings. It's an emotions crime. It's not even a word crime, it's an emotions crime. Let me just give you a quick example. C9 creates a law that if you commit any other offense in Canada, from littering to, I don't know, stealing a library book or something, if there is a hateful element to it, you can now also be charged with a hate crime, like a standalone universal hate crime. It's like we have a hate finder general who's now scoping for the wrong emotions. All of this was done because for the last 2 years there have been pro-Hamas protesters marching through Jewish neighborhoods, shouting at elderly Jews, screaming outside synagogues, sometimes with PA systems, and the police have done nothing about it. So this is Parliament's way of saying, oh, we'll do something about it. But you see, they won't actually enforce real laws against uttering death threats, harassment, stalking, trespass, assault. Like, there's a lot of real crimes being committed in Canada by Hamas supporters, like there is in the UK. But instead of doing the hard work of arresting them, they're going to ban the swastika, for example. Okay, thanks for coming to the party 80 years late. The swastika is not the problem. I mean, banning the swastika wouldn't have stopped the shooting in Bondi Beach, Australia. So you have a terrible law that in some ways is a sop to the Jewish community, pretending to care about them. In some ways it's taking on right-wingers by banning the swastika and the SS symbol. But it's also an attack on Christianity. Let me explain why. In the past, hate speech laws in Canada have some of them have had a defense that if it's a legitimately held religious belief, you can't be convicted. So this is being removed in Canada. Having a genuine religious belief is no longer an exemption to hate. So theoretically, this would be applied to Hamas supporters who are Islamic extremists. But no, I've seen this movie before. This will be used against Christians. For example, there's a lot of lawsuits in Canada about transgenderism. And there's a lot of pastors who have been arrested for opposing these kindergarten transgender story times. And this will be used against Christians who oppose transgenderism or other things, even though it's being brought in the name of fighting against Hamas hatred. It's a terrible law, one of half a dozen that this government is obsessed with.
In Britain, we've seen lots of cases of people being arrested for their tweets, which the government claim are grossly offensive or, that are anti-migrant, racist, they say inciting hatred, things like that. Have you seen the same thing in Canada where people are being arrested and prosecuted and put in prison for their social media posts?
The answer is yes. And I mentioned C9, the Combating Hate Act. C8, again, it just shows how many proposed laws they have for censorship, would give the government power simply to turn off your internet. There's other more subtle forms of censorship too. For example, they had a huge an internet linking tax that they put on Google, and Facebook refused to pay it. I mean, the whole way the internet works is that you link to someone you don't get paid, you don't pay to do it, you just do it. The government said to Facebook and Google, you have to pay money to government-approved journalists for the privilege of linking to them. So Google said, sure, we're in. Facebook said, no, wait, that's insane. So you cannot share any Canadian news on Facebook. It blocks it. Now, Facebook says they're blocking it because they don't want to pay this ridiculous link tax that they would have to, like anytime someone would share a story on Facebook, Facebook would have to pay money to this government fund. Facebook said no. But the net effect of that is that a huge source of independent citizen journalism has been blacked out. And the incumbent regime media, like our state broadcaster, the CBC, or the other big incumbents, they don't really need Facebook to survive. Everyone's heard of them. It's the citizen journalists, the independent journalists who have suffered. So whether it's on purpose charging someone with a hate crime, or shutting down their internet account, or just the byproduct of their overregulation, Canada's freedom is shrinking. One more quick story. Twitter, or X as it's now called, was recently ordered in the province of British Columbia to delete certain posts that offended a transgender extremist activist. And so Twitter complied by blocking that tweet in Canada, but allowing it to remain up for the rest of the world. And that British Columbia court, it's called a tribunal, said that it has jurisdiction over Twitter over the whole world. And if Twitter didn't delete this tweet in every country, including the United States of America, that they would, because they didn't, they had to pay a $100,000 fine. There's other bills that, for example, Justin Trudeau brought forward something called C-63. I'm throwing all these different numbers at you. I'm just trying to show how many of these bills there are. That it would fine any social media platform a percentage of their global revenues. So they would fine Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, not based on what they're doing in Canada, but based on their sales in Europe, in America, in South America. The audacity of these censors, it's a very European approach. In fact, Justin Trudeau and now Mark Carney very much affiliate and identify as Europeans. Mark Carney, our new Prime Minister himself, says we're the most European country that's not in Europe. He's got an Irish passport, he's got a British passport, it's sort of weird. And he's following the European approach to censorship and to trying to make money off of Twitter. I mean, I saw an interesting stat that Europe, there's so few tech giants in Europe that the EU actually makes more money from levying fines against Facebook and Apple and YouTube than they do from legitimate taxes on their own tech companies. I mean, it's like the joke, America is all of these innovating companies like NVIDIA and Tesla, whatever, and the great innovation in the EU is that DPRS, or that privacy warning that pops up on your website, and when you have a bottle of water, you can't get rid of the lid. That's the great European innovation. Canada is choosing the European approach instead of the American First Amendment approach. That said, there are folks like our little company, Rebel News, that are fighting like hell, squawking, and we're not going to go quietly, as you could probably guess.
Let's talk about your company then, Rebel. What about your own experiences with freedom of speech in Canada? I know that you helped launch this board that went around a Canadian city that was talking about Hamas, and you got in some trouble there. Can you talk about your own anecdotes?
Sure. I mean, I'll just give you a few examples. In the 2019 election, I published a book called The Libranos. It's a takeoff on The Sopranos. I was telling stories about corruption in the Liberal Party. And we had a guerrilla marketing campaign for the book where we had the cover of the book, which was a stylized image of Trudeau, and the three words, "Buy the book." And it was a lawn sign, which I thought was a great way of advertising an election. The government prosecuted me for, 5 years. They fined me thousands of dollars because they said that wasn't a real book. It was a campaign tactic or something. But the law has a specific exemption for books and the promotion of books. And in that same election, there were 24 books published about Justin Trudeau. Mine was the bestseller of the 24. Now, 23 of the 24 books were either neutral or praising Trudeau. Mine was the only book that was very, very critical. And yet mine was the only one that was deemed a campaign tactic or something. It was sold at a legitimate price, sold on Amazon. It was a real book. It was actually my best-selling book I've ever written. And the government prosecuted me for years. There's no way they didn't spend $1 million. We went all the way up to the Federal Court of Appeal. By the way, this same Elections Canada regulator that went after me, they did not investigate credible reports by our CSIS, that's our spy agency, of the Chinese government infiltrating Liberal primaries, Liberal candidate selection meetings. So they were busy chasing me because I embarrassed Justin Trudeau, but they wouldn't go after actual threats to our democracy. That's one small example. Here's another one. The government in Canada, for some weird reason, nationalized the leaders' debates during elections. Why? They turned it into a government agency. Before that, you would have universities, you would have media consortiums. Like, it was whoever wanted to have a debate had a debate. Trudeau, again, turned that into a government agency, and it's obvious why. It became obvious extremely quickly. Because he could ban reporters he didn't like from attending. And, you know, spoiler alert, Steve, they banned Rebel News. So we went to court in 2019, and it was miraculous. The judge ordered Trudeau to accredit us. They banned us again in 2021. We went to court again. The judge was extremely frustrated with the government, accredited us again. So finally this year, they stopped banning us, but now they've announced they're going to shut down all scrums after the debate, because that's the only way they could stop us. They couldn't single us out, so they shut the whole thing down. So since they couldn't just censor Rebel News, they're going to censor everyone so they can still censor Rebel News. It's almost too much to believe. That's how it is. I could give you so many other examples. We fight and win some of them, as I mentioned, but it's such a uphill battle. The government has unlimited funds. Here's another quick example. As you know, every politician has their personal social media account. And that's fine. That's great. Your Facebook page for friends and family, whatever. But these days, every government cabinet minister has an official Facebook page, Twitter account, whatever, that government staff work on. And it's obviously totally legitimate. That's where people are. That's where you have public messages, etc. So all these Liberal cabinet ministers would order their departments to block Rebel News or other conservative critics. But that would be like, you're not allowed to call the tax agency on the phone. You're not allowed to visit an office. Twitter is really no different than other accesses to service. But they would block us, not from their personal accounts. They can block me from their personal account. I don't care. I'm not interested in their family vacation photos. They were blocking a news agency from getting departmental press releases and information merely because they hated us, and maybe they thought the feeling was mutual. So we went to court and we actually won that one, but that was a $100,000 battle. So how many $100,000, and they would have spent $1 million on it. I mean, we're often in court, it's one of us and 5 or 6 lawyers on the other side. I'm not kidding. They have the largest law firm in the country, when you think about it, is the Department of Justice. So how could a little guy fight all these battles? We try. I'd say we lose about half the time. And I'll make a confession here. I think we need foreign help. Now, I'm a nationalist. I believe, foreigners should mind their own business and Canada should mind its own business. But I don't know if we're strong enough to resist this censorship imposed upon us. And I'm sort of hoping that the tech companies based in Silicon Valley, like Elon Musk's Twitter, I think is the most important example, will actually help Canada maintain our freedom. So if we're ever nuked under one of these laws, I'm crossing my fingers, that a bigger dog than us can come to our aid. And I know that J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have chided the UK and the European Union for censorship. They haven't said the same about Canada. Maybe they don't think it's as acute a problem here yet, and it's not. I mean, I know every single day in the UK, 30 different people are arrested on a daily basis for Facebook posts. It's not that bad in Canada, I'm willing to admit. But if it does get that bad, who's going to save us? I think there comes a point in time where we need external aid. We don't have the internal checks and balances to help ourselves. We don't have the First Amendment. We don't have a robust check and balance system. I'm afraid that Elon Musk, it sort of helped me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. I feel that way about Elon Musk. And I know he's helping out in the UK. As you probably know, he's paying the bills for Tommy Robinson, which is Tommy had to crowdfund his legals. We helped with that. Now Elon Musk is paying those bills. I know that Twitter has set up something they call the Anti-Retaliation Project. So they're trying to help people who have been retaliated against for their Twitter account. We're in the middle of a big fight, Stephen. And by the way, GB News, I think, is one of the leading forces for free speech in the Anglosphere. You guys are stronger on that issue, I think, than any other, certainly stronger than anything in Canada, certainly just as strong as Fox News. So I think that you guys are the pointy edge of the spear in the UK.
What about when it comes to discussions around Hamas and discussions of immigration in Canada? Obviously, Canada has experienced a huge level of immigration, and also discussions around Israel and Hamas, I know, have been very controversial. Has there been any censorship around topics like in the UK where people don't want to talk about immigration for fear of, being accused of hate speech or even talking about Hamas?
Well, you're talking to the guy who almost 20 years ago was prosecuted by the Alberta Human Rights Commission simply for republishing the Danish cartoons of Mohammed. So I have a 20-year history of being censored by the government for criticizing radical Islamic extremism. We have, there's a saying that Daniel Pipes of the Middle East Forum uses, which is radical Islam is the problem, moderate Islam is the solution. I don't think that's everything, but there's a lot to it. And there are Muslim moderates out there, I know that, and we're allied with them. And many of them are the chief critics of rolling over for Sharia law and Muslim Brotherhood Islamism. I'm afraid, though, moderate Muslims, at least in those willing to speak up publicly, are a small minority. I think we've had such mass immigration here proportionately, you may find this hard to believe, Steve, but even more than the UK. And there's one more problem. When people come over in dinghies across the English Channel, they're coming over illegally, they're making an asylum claim that's obviously bogus, they will actually be easier to deport than people who come to Canada, quote, legally. Because we've reduced to zero, there's no meetings, there's no in-person meeting in an application to come to Canada. There's so many ways to piggyback on extended family members. There's so many fake and fraudulent claims that are approved. It's going to be a lot harder to deport those bad faith immigrants from Canada who have come in, quote, legally than in the UK. Frankly, I look to the UK for some hope, even though you have a terrible situation. You have in Nigel Farage a popular leader who is getting bolder every month. And it was your interview that I watched when you first asked him, would you be open to mass deportations? And he sort of cringed at that, and he recoiled from that, and now he's embraced it. And I think he's getting more and more courage. The polls are confirming his instincts. I think if he can keep it together, he will be in a position to carry out his promise of mass deportations. I think he will, by the way. We don't yet have that in Canada. Our Conservative Party is not yet as bold as Nigel Farage is, let alone Geert Wilders in the Netherlands or the Le Pen family or others in France. You know me, Steve, I visit the UK and Ireland and Marseille and the Netherlands a lot. And I always say, visiting Europe is my dystopian time machine. I can see what a dark future will look like in 5 or 10 years in Canada if we don't change course. Of course, the exemplar for all of this is Donald Trump. He's using words like remigration. He's trying to make deportations cool again if you follow their social media. And I think he will save America from this if he's allowed to continue. Canada is a question mark. The UK, well, at least you realize the problem you're in. I don't know, it's a global problem in the Anglosphere. Look at Australia. What are they going to do? I don't know.
Let's talk about Australia briefly. Obviously, there was this terrible attack on Bondi Beach against Jews, the massacre of more than a dozen Jewish people out on that beach. Has there been a response in Canada to that? Has Canadian politicians, thought about anti-Semitism, thought about some of the immigration policies where maybe Canada has imported a lot of radical Muslims? Has there been any response to this attack on the beach?
None. Oh, except for some "our hearts go out to you" tweets. One of the things that struck me about what happened in Australia was how the Jews, there was about 1,000 Jews on the beach celebrating Hanukkah, and they had 5 security guards who were unarmed. And the police, as you saw, there were at least 3 female police who, instead of rushing towards the gunfire to stop it, they ducked and hid. There was a feminine instinct that took over. And the shooters went on for almost 20 minutes, unmolested. There was a police station a 3-minute walk away. And to me, there's a lot in there, especially when the Australian government now says we have to crack down on right-wing extremists and we have to crack down on guns. No, brother, it's not the guns. I mean, in Nice, France, an Islamist got behind the wheel of a big truck and murdered 83 people just by driving on them. If it's not a gun, it'll be a knife. If it's not a knife, it'll be a bomb. It'll be whatever. In Canada, we are disarmed as well. There's not a Jewish school or synagogue or Jewish place that has an armed guard. We have all these meaningless mall cops who just sort of stand around and nod. It's like a Tesco in London. You've got this guy just sort of standing there at the door, being paid minimum wage. He's not going to fight for anything. So I think Canada, Australia acknowledged Palestinian sovereignty. So did Canada. Australia has talked tough about arresting Netanyahu for war crimes. So has Canada. Australia has not vetted its migrants for cultural fit and nonviolence. Same in Canada. I hate to say it, and I pray it doesn't come, but I am completely certain that we will have a violent terrorist attack. There's a Jewish girls' school 10 minutes from my house that has been attacked by gunfire 3 times. Now, it was at night, but it was shot at. There's another Jewish synagogue not far from my house. 10 times it's been attacked by vandals. Maybe the police might, I don't know, put a camera there. Maybe the police might stake it out. No, that's Islamophobic. I'm really worried about things, Steve. And by the way, the Jews are first, but the Christians will be second. Hamas and the Islamic extremist ideology is expansionist. It's totalitarian. And if you want a picture of what things look like, look at Egypt, which used to be a Christian country. Look at Turkey. That's an absurd example, but it used to be a Christian country. Look at the purging, the ethnic cleansing of Christians from Nazareth and Bethlehem. I encourage you to go to Bethlehem and see what has been done by the Muslim authorities who actually have local jurisdiction there. That is the future. Look at Birmingham. I mean, no Jews allowed at a football match, and we'll cook up some excuse for it, and we'll riot if you don't agree. That is the future. Sectarian MPs who say, give Gaza your vote. Last Jew out of Birmingham turned off the lights, but there's going to be a lot of Christians left there. I don't know, what's the future? Rape gangs? Sharia law? I've never been to Birmingham before I went to that Tel Aviv Maccabi game the Jewish fans were blocked. But that is a very dark future, that town.
Do you think there's been some naivety, obviously from the left, who see immigration as a good, diversity is our strength, multiculturalism is fantastic, the melting pot and so on, but also from some on the new right or the online right who are obsessed with Jews and Israel and perhaps don't see radical Islam as a threat because maybe they see Islam or Muslims as an ally against their crusade against what some people online, a minority, would call world Jewry.
Yeah. Well, they have different motives, and so they're allies of convenience. Muslim migrants, some of them are happy to come to the West, but others bring with them the eternal goal of Muhammad, which is to conquer and convert. That wouldn't go well with Christian nationalist online right Twitter. But if they can focus on the Jews as our cosmic enemy, then they find common ground. Here's what I would say to the online right that might be tempted to do this. I've got 3 reasons why they shouldn't indulge in anti-Semitism. First of all, it's not very conservative to believe in group guilt or the Jews did this, the Jews did that. You're judging people not as individuals, but as a collective, which is not a conservative way of thinking. That's maybe a woke way of thinking. You know, all the Jews are oppressors. The left would say the Jews are the oppressors, the Muslims are the oppressed, which is quite something to say when you look around the world and see what life is like for Christians under Islam. So the first reason is don't become a collectivist where you judge every Jew as part of the Jews. Second of all, anti-Semitism is very often used as an excuse or a scapegoat for your own problems. Oh, I got a traffic ticket because of the Jews. I'm giving an absurd example, but when I follow people of the online extreme right, some of whom used to be my friends, they've got caught up in the addiction of someone to blame for everything. You know, it's the universal answer for why are things not going well for me, either in America or the world or my own personal life. It's the damn Jews. It's a universal excuse. And that's not a freedom-oriented, conservative-oriented way to think either. And I think the third one is what you're referring to, which is, are Jews really the problem? 100,000 British girls raped by overwhelmingly Pakistani Muslim men. Are the Jews the problem in the UK? Or Ireland? I love Ireland. I go there all the time. There's 2,000 Jews in a country of 5 million people. I hear from the Irish left, or some people, it's actually the right, the Jews are our misfortune. The Jews are what brought these migrants here. Really? There hasn't been a Jew in the Irish Parliament in more than a decade. Leo Varadkar, Mihail, Simon Harris. These are not Jews. The people who are bringing in the mass migration, it's just an absurd distraction. There is a crisis in Ireland rooted in mass immigration. There's a crisis all across the UK, from Rotherham to Telford to 100 other towns and cities. I guess it's easier to take on the Jews than to deal with the real crisis in your own country. The Jews aren't coming over 500 at a time in dinghies, and when they get there, they go on welfare and they commit violent crimes. I'm not blaming all Muslims, but my God, if you're a Brit or an Irishman or an American and you think the problems in your country are from the Jews, you are part of a psychological operation that, I hate to say it, is largely funded by Qatar. And others are doing it just to feel taboo and feel risque. There's nothing easier than poking at a Jew, because you know they're not going to suicide bomb you. They all love pretending they're bad boys. And you see comedians like Theo Von or Tim Dillon taking on the Jews, because the Jews aren't going to go Charlie Hebdo on you. You know, Charlie Hebdo, we forget, that was a satirical magazine in Paris. And they would mock everyone, make fun of every group, especially Jews and Christians. Well, one day they made fun of Islam, and some Muslim extremists broke in and murdered them, murdered almost the entire staff. That's what happens if you're really edgy. It's easy to mock Christians, it's easy to mock Jews, but no one in comedy mocks Muslims anymore, because you'll get blown up.
Okay, Ezra, thank you so much for joining us. That was great.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.